Emily, Sandro, and Ethan had been inseparable since their university days. They studied together, shared dreams, and graduated with honors. Ethan supported her financially and emotionally, even after school. When he discovered a high-paying vacancy at Lagos's most prestigious manufacturing company, he selflessly passed the opportunity to Emily. She aced the interview and got the job, unaware that this choice would change everything. Their story began in the bustling campus library of their university, where Emily had once dropped an entire stack of books in the middle of the aisle. Ethan, who had been reading quietly nearby, bent down to help her gather them. Their hands brushed, and she looked up to find a pair of warm, steady eyes that seemed to notice everything. It was a small moment, but it planted the seed of a bond that grew stronger with each passing semester. They studied together late into the night, often sharing a single plate of fried rice and chicken at the cafeteria when money was tight. Emily admired Ethan's discipline. He admired her determination. He came from a modest background, working part-time to support himself, while she had grown up with slightly more comfort, but still understood the value of hard work. By the time graduation rolled around, they were more than just a couple. They were each other's anchor. Post-graduation life in Lagos was not kind to young job seekers. The competition was fierce, and the cost of living seemed to rise every month. Ethan picked up freelance consulting jobs to pay his bills while Emily interned at a small logistics firm. They often spent their evenings in Ethan's small apartment in Surulere, sharing bowls of spicy noodles and talking about their plans for the future. They dreamed about traveling, starting a business together, and maybe someday buying a home in one of the quieter neighborhoods of the city. One humid Thursday afternoon, Ethan came across a job listing while scrolling through his laptop in a cafe near Victoria Island. The headline caught his attention immediately: Executive Assistant Khalifa Manufacturing Group. It wasn't just any company. It was the crown jewel of Lagos's industrial sector, a place where careers were made and fortunes could shift overnight. The salary was more than either of them had ever earned, and the position came with health benefits, travel allowances, and an impressive corporate network. Ethan read the listing twice, then leaned back in his chair. He could apply. His qualifications matched perfectly. But as he thought about Emily, her potential, her drive, and the sacrifices she had made for them, he made a decision without hesitation. That evening, he handed her a printed copy of the job listing. "This is yours," he said simply. Emily frowned. "Yours, you mean?" "Ethan, you'd be perfect for this." "No," he replied, shaking his head. "You've been stuck in that logistics internship for months. This is your chance to break into the big league. I'll find something else. You go for it." She hesitated. "Are you sure?" "Absolutely," he said, smiling. "Besides, I'd love to see you in one of those sleek corporate offices on Victoria Island." And so Emily applied. She pored over her CV, polished her cover letter, and prepared for the possibility of the biggest interview of her life. 2 weeks later, she received the email. "You have been shortlisted for an interview." Her heart raced. She called Ethan immediately, and he promised to help her rehearse her answers every night until the big day. The morning of the interview, Lagos was its usual chaotic self. Traffic snarled the roads, hawkers weaved between cars selling everything from plantain chips to USB chargers, and the heat clung stubbornly to the air. Emily arrived at the towering glass headquarters of Khalifa Manufacturing Group 30 minutes early, dressed in a fitted navy suit and low heels. The building was a masterpiece of modern architecture: sleek lines, polished marble floors, and a reception area that smelled faintly of citrus and leather. She sat in the waiting area, her hands clasped in her lap, silently rehearsing the points she'd prepared. When her name was called, she followed the HR assistant into a spacious boardroom. 3 panelists sat at the far end of the table, their expressions neutral but watchful. The questions came quickly, about her experience, her ability to handle pressure, her long-term career goals. Emily's voice stayed steady, her answers crisp. She didn't just want to impress them, she wanted to make Ethan proud. When the interview ended, one of the panelists offered her a small smile. "Thank you, Miss Sandro. We'll be in touch." 2 days later, the email arrived. She had been chosen for the position. Ethan was the first person she told. His grin was wide and genuine, as he swept her into his arms. "I knew you'd get it," he said, lifting her off the ground. That evening, he took her to a rooftop restaurant overlooking the Lagos Lagoon. The view was breathtaking, the water shimmering under the fading sunset, the city lights slowly coming to life. Over plates of peppered prawns and jollof rice, they toasted to her new beginning. Emily's first weeks at Khalifa Manufacturing Group were a blur. The pace was fast, the expectations high. Her colleagues were sharp, ambitious, and impeccably dressed. The company culture was built on precision and results, and everyone seemed proud to work there. She quickly learned the unspoken rules: arrive early, never miss a deadline, and always carry yourself with confidence. It was during a coffee break in the staff lounge that she first heard whispers about Malik Khalifa, the company's elusive CEO. He was 40, rarely in the country, and fiercely private. Some said he was a visionary. Others claimed he was cold and unapproachable. Emily listened quietly, curious but focused on settling into her role. Little did she know, her path and Malik's would cross sooner than she imagined, and when it did, the ripples would reach far beyond her career. For now, though, Emily allowed herself to bask in the glow of her achievement. She was grateful to Ethan for believing in her, for stepping aside so she could take this chance. In her mind, this was their win, a stepping stone toward the future they had always imagined. But the truth was, life has a way of shifting paths when we least expect it. And Emily's new job was not just a door opening. It was a threshold into a world she was not prepared for. 2 months into her new role, Emily met Malik Khalifa, the reserved 40-year-old CEO who had just returned from an overseas trip. Known for his impeccable manners and distant demeanor, Malik was respected but mysterious. Emily became intrigued, gradually shifting her focus from work to catching his attention. Her calculated charm worked. Malik noticed her, thinking she would make the perfect, unquestioning trophy wife. It happened on a humid Monday morning, when the usual buzz in the office was replaced by a quiet, tense anticipation. Rumors had been circulating for days. Malik Khalifa was back. The elevators opened, and for the first time, Emily saw him in person. He was taller than she had expected, his presence commanding yet effortless. His charcoal suit was perfectly tailored, the crisp white shirt beneath it open at the collar, hinting at a man who valued control but wasn't afraid of understated rebellion. His stride was confident, each step measured. People greeted him respectfully, but he didn't linger for small talk. His gaze swept over the office like a sharp beam of light, cool, assessing, uninterested in anything that didn't serve a purpose. When his eyes briefly met Emily's, she felt an unexpected jolt. He gave a polite nod and continued walking to his office without breaking stride. For the rest of the day, Emily found herself distracted. She replayed that brief moment, the way his eyes had held hers for a fraction longer than necessary. She told herself it meant nothing. He was probably looking at everyone like that, but deep down she wondered if he had noticed her. Over the following days, she began paying closer attention to his movements. Malik was a ghost in his own company, present but only just. He came in for high-level meetings, signed documents, reviewed strategies, and then vanished again, often on trips abroad or to the company's factories in other states. He rarely interacted with junior staff, preferring to work through his trusted team of executives. Still, Emily was determined to make herself visible. She started volunteering for projects that would require her to submit reports directly to him. She positioned herself strategically during department briefings, ensuring she was in his line of sight. She began wearing more tailored outfits, sleek pencil skirts, silk blouses, and subtle jewelry that caught the light just enough to be noticed. One Friday afternoon, her opportunity came. A senior manager asked her to deliver a quarterly performance report to Malik's office. She straightened her posture, smoothed her skirt, and knocked gently on his door. "Come in," a deep voice called from inside. She stepped into a spacious office that looked more like a private study than a corporate workspace. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed a panoramic view of the Lagos Lagoon. A massive mahogany desk dominated the center, papers arranged in precise stacks. Malik sat behind it, reading a file. He looked up, and for a moment, those cool gray eyes studied her. "Miss Sandro," he said, as though testing the sound of her name. "You're new." Yes, sir, she replied, keeping her voice steady. I've been here for 2 months. He nodded slowly. You've been doing good work. I've seen your reports. Thank you, she said, placing the file on his desk. I enjoy working here. A faint, almost imperceptible smile tugged at the corner of his lips. That will be all. It was a short interaction, but for Emily, it was enough. She left his office with her pulse racing, convinced she had caught his attention. From then on, she escalated her efforts. She made sure her work was flawless, knowing it would reach his desk. She lingered near the executive lounge when she knew he'd be there, always ready with a polite greeting. When he traveled, she sent concise, well-written updates that didn't require a reply, but kept her name fresh in his mind. Her colleagues began to notice. Some teased her lightly about always being where the CEO is. Others whispered behind her back, speculating about her sudden interest in him. Emily ignored them. In her mind, this was not about gossip. It was about positioning herself for a life she had only dreamed of. Ethan, however, sensed the shift. He noticed she came home later, often too tired to talk. When they did speak, her stories were increasingly about work and about Malik. Ethan listened quietly, forcing himself to be supportive, but something inside him began to ache. He had given her this opportunity, and now it felt like she was slipping away. One rainy evening, Emily returned home to find Ethan cooking dinner. The smell of jollof rice filled the air, the sound of rain tapping against the windows. They ate in near silence until Ethan finally asked, "You've been different lately. Is everything okay?" Emily smiled faintly. "I'm just focused on work. You know how it is." He nodded, but his eyes told her he wasn't convinced. Meanwhile, Malik's opinion of Emily had begun to form. He saw her as ambitious, adaptable, and, most importantly, discreet. She didn't pry, didn't gossip, and seemed perfectly content to play her role without overstepping. To him, that was valuable. A woman like Emily could be molded into exactly what he needed. A wife who wouldn't ask questions, who would enjoy the privileges he provided and leave him to live his life as he pleased. 2 weeks later, Malik called her into his office again. This time, the meeting lasted longer. They discussed the company's expansion plans, and he asked her opinion on a marketing proposal. She was careful to sound informed but not overconfident, professional yet approachable. When she left, she felt the unmistakable shift. This was no longer just a CEO noticing an employee. This was a man beginning to consider her in a different light. The stage was set. Emily had entered Malik's orbit, and she had no intention of leaving. What she didn't realize was that Malik had already decided her future, and it wasn't the fairy tale she imagined. Malik began courting Emily with expensive gifts and exclusive dinners. At first, it felt surreal, stepping into a life she'd only glimpsed from afar. He sent bouquets of imported roses to her office, each arrangement taller than her desk. Designer handbags arrived at her apartment without warning, their glossy shopping bags gleaming like trophies. On weekends, he took her to private dinners in restaurants most people in Lagos only saw in magazines, secluded tables overlooking the lagoon, with waiters who moved like shadows and dishes plated like works of art. Emily told herself she deserved it. She had worked hard, and Malik's attention was a reward for that. But deep down, she knew her growing closeness to him wasn't about merit. It was about charm, timing, and a silent understanding between them that this was more than just business. Ethan noticed immediately. He still called, still invited her over for dinner, but her excuses piled up. Late meetings, corporate events, exhaustion. She never mentioned Malik by name, but Ethan wasn't naive. One evening, when she canceled plans for the third week in a row, his voice cracked over the phone. "Emily, are you seeing someone else?" There was a long pause. "Ethan, my life is changing right now. I can't explain everything, but you need to trust me." Trust me. The same words she had once whispered to him during their toughest years. But now, they felt hollow. 2 months later, Malik made his intentions clear. He invited her to his penthouse suite at the Echo Atlantic Towers, a place with floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the city like a living painting. There, over a table set with champagne and gold-rimmed plates, he asked her to marry him. His tone was calm, almost businesslike, but his words carried weight. "I believe you would fit well into my life, Emily," he said, holding her gaze. "You'll be taken care of. You'll never have to worry about anything again." She didn't hesitate. She said yes. There was no dramatic breakup with Ethan. In fact, there was no breakup at all. She simply stopped returning his calls. When news of her engagement surfaced, splashed across Lagos society blogs with photographs of her wearing a diamond that caught the sun like a star, Ethan saw it on his phone while sitting alone in his apartment. His chest felt hollow. The woman he had loved, supported, and sacrificed for had left him without a goodbye. The wedding was nothing short of a spectacle. It took place in one of Lagos's most exclusive hotels. The grand ballroom transformed into a garden of white orchids and crystal chandeliers. Guests arrived in Rolls Royces and designer gowns, their conversations a hum of wealth and influence. Photographers captured every moment. The moment Emily stepped out in her custom-made gown, the moment Malik slid a platinum band onto her finger, the moment fireworks lit up the night sky as they shared their first dance. To the world, it was a fairy tale. To Ethan, it was a public betrayal. And to Malik, it was the closing of a transaction. After the wedding, Malik moved Emily into his mansion in Banana Island. The property was a work of art, marble floors that gleamed like still water, a swimming pool shaped like a crescent moon, and a private wing entirely for her use. The closets were stocked with couture dresses, the garage filled with imported cars. Her days were a blur of spa appointments, high-end shopping, and charity luncheons with other society wives. But one thing was missing. Malik. From the start, he kept his distance. He never shared her bedroom, preferring his own suite at the opposite end of the mansion. He rarely dined with her, and when he did, the conversation was polite but cold, like two strangers sharing a table out of obligation. Most weeks, he was gone, traveling from one state to another, from one country to the next, handling business Emily wasn't privy to. At first, she told herself this was temporary. He was busy, and once things settled, they'd have more time together. But months passed, and nothing changed. When she complained, he responded with lavish gifts. A diamond necklace here, a weekend shopping trip in Dubai there. "You have everything you could want," he said once, handing her a credit card with no limit. "Don't trouble yourself with the rest." She learned to stop asking. Still, loneliness crept in. The mansion was vast, but the silence inside was heavier than she could bear. At night, she would sit on the balcony overlooking the lagoon, watching the city lights flicker in the distance, wondering if she had made a mistake. She had the life she thought she wanted: wealth, status, security. But the warmth, the laughter, the companionship she'd once had with Ethan was gone. One evening, while walking through the main hall, she noticed something. Malik had returned from a trip, and instead of greeting her, he went straight to the living room where a man was waiting. It was his best friend, the same man who had been his best man at their wedding. Emily had seen him before, but she had never seen Malik like this. His face lit up. He laughed easily, leaned in close, and spoke in a tone Emily had never heard directed at her. They spent hours together, talking, drinking, and sharing inside jokes. Watching them from the doorway, Emily felt a pang she couldn't name, part jealousy, part confusion. It was clear Malik came alive around this man in a way he never did with her. That night, as she lay in her bed alone, she stared at the ceiling and wondered how 2 months of courtship had led her here, married, wealthy, but a wife in name only. Over the months, Emily noticed Malik was only truly animated when spending time with his best friend, a 30-year-old man who had been his best man at their wedding. They laughed, traveled, and shared moments Emily longed to have with her husband. Jealousy turned into suspicion, but she buried her thoughts, choosing instead to cling to the comfort of her lavish lifestyle. It began subtly. Malik's trips were no longer purely business. His best friend, Adrian Cole, was almost always with him. Whenever Malik returned, Emily would find them together in the living room or on the terrace sipping whiskey, their conversation punctuated by bursts of laughter. Malik's reserved demeanor, so carefully guarded with everyone else, melted away around Adrian. His voice would grow warmer, his smile easier. Emily told herself it was normal. Men had close friendships, Perhaps Malik simply felt more at ease with someone who had known him for years. But the contrast was glaring. With her, he was polite, formal, distant. With Adrian, he was alive. She began noticing patterns. Malik's eyes would light up the moment Adrian arrived. Their conversations were filled with shared memories and private jokes, the kind of shorthand that made Emily feel like an outsider in her own home. Even the staff noticed, exchanging subtle glances when the two men were together. One afternoon, Emily was coming down the sweeping staircase when she overheard them in the sitting room. "You remember that night in Dubai?" Adrian was saying, his tone low but amused. Malik chuckled, a deep, genuine sound Emily had never drawn from him. "How could I forget? That was the best week of my life." Emily froze on the staircase, her fingers tightening around the railing. Best week of his life? She had been married to Malik for nearly a year, and he had never spoken about any moment with her in such glowing terms. The next day, Malik announced he would be traveling again, this time to Cape Town for meetings. As always, Adrian would accompany him. Emily smiled and wished him well, but once he was gone, the house felt heavier than usual. She spent the week drifting from one room to another, the silence pressing in on her. The high ceilings and marble floors, once symbols of her new life, now felt like walls closing in. When Malik returned, Emily watched from the balcony as the two men stepped out of the sleek black Range Rover. Adrian said something that made Malik throw his head back in laughter, his hand brushing Adrian's arm in a way that seemed almost intimate. Emily's stomach knotted. She forced herself to look away before they noticed her. She tried to push the thoughts from her mind. What would be the point of asking questions? Malik had made it clear from the beginning that he valued discretion. Confronting him might only push him further away, or worse, threaten the security she had come to depend on. So she buried her unease beneath layers of luxury. There were charity luncheons to attend, designer fittings to schedule, spa appointments to keep. Her days were filled with the trappings of wealth, but her nights were restless. She found herself lying awake, staring at the ornate ceiling of her bedroom, wondering what Malik and Adrian were doing on their endless business trips. One Friday evening, they hosted a small gathering at the mansion. The guest list was exclusive: CEOs, politicians, and their elegant spouses. Emily played the role of perfect hostess, her smile flawless as she moved from guest to guest. But her eyes kept drifting to Malik and Adrian, who stood together in a corner, their heads bent close in conversation. At one point, Adrian placed a hand on Malik's shoulder, and Malik didn't move away. The gesture was casual enough to go unnoticed by most, but to Emily it felt like a silent confirmation of something she didn't want to name. Later that night, after the guests had left and the house had quieted, Emily poured herself a glass of wine and sat alone in the grand dining room. She thought of Ethan, the way he used to listen to her, laugh with her, touch her without hesitation. She had traded that for a life where her husband's affection seemed to belong entirely to someone else. But then her eyes wandered to the diamond bracelet on her wrist, the custom-made Italian heels at her feet, the view of the lagoon shimmering under the moonlight. Comfort was a powerful anchor, and it kept her rooted in place. Still, the cracks in her resolve were growing. She began to watch Malik more closely, noting the way his schedule shifted depending on Adrian's availability. She noticed the frequency of their private dinners, the way Malik's mood lifted for days after spending time with him. The final straw came one afternoon when she found a travel itinerary on Malik's desk while dropping off some documents. The trip was to Paris, booked for 2 people. Her name wasn't on it. That evening, when Malik returned, she asked casually, "Are you traveling again soon?" "Yes," he replied, removing his cufflinks. "Paris, business meetings." "With Adrian?" He glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "Yes, why?" Emily forced a smile. "Just curious." She let it drop, but her mind wouldn't rest. The suspicion she'd been trying to smother for months now burned like a quiet flame. She didn't know what the truth was yet, but she knew one thing. Malik's happiness, his energy, his warmth, belonged to Adrian in a way it had never belonged to her. And yet, she stayed. For the clothes, for the mansion, for the image of perfection she projected to the world. She told herself that until she had proof, real proof, she would keep her place and play her part. But deep down, Emily knew the truth had a way of revealing itself, whether you were ready for it or not. The night was still, the kind of Lagos night where even the hum of the city seemed to fade into the background. Emily lay in her king-size bed, staring at the ornate chandelier above her. Sleep had evaded her for hours. She turned over, fluffing the silk pillows, but her mind was restless. It wasn't unusual for Malik to be gone or locked away in his own wing of the mansion. But tonight, something felt different, an unease that sat heavy in her chest. Finally, she slipped out of bed, wrapping a satin robe around herself. The marble floors were cool beneath her bare feet as she padded toward the kitchen for a glass of water. The hallways were dimly lit, golden light spilling from the recessed sconces, casting long shadows across the walls. She had just turned toward the staircase when a sound reached her. It wasn't loud, but it was distinct, low, muffled noises coming from the direction of Malik's suite. At first she thought it might be the television, but then she heard it clearly. A man's voice, deep and breathless. Her steps faltered. The sound sent a cold wave through her. She stood in the hallway, heart thundering, straining to hear. The noises grew clearer, layered with something else. A rhythm, a tone she knew all too well from moments of intimacy. Only this was not hers to share. A knot formed in her throat as she approached his door. Her fingers trembled against the brass handle. Every rational thought screamed at her to walk away, but something inside her, curiosity, dread, or both, pushed her forward. She opened the door. The scene hit her like a punch. Malik was there, half covered by expensive sheets, his body tangled with Adrian's. Their closeness was unmistakable, the intimacy raw and undeniable. They didn't flinch at her presence. If anything, Malik's expression barely changed. Calm, almost indifferent. Emily's breath caught. Her knees felt weak. She stepped back, one hand covering her mouth, as if she could physically keep the shock from spilling out. Malik rose from the bed with unhurried movements, pulling on a robe. Adrian remained where he was, his face turned away, avoiding her gaze. Malik walked toward her, his posture relaxed, his eyes cold. "This," he said, gesturing toward the bed, "is who I am." Emily's lips parted, but no words came out. The silence between them stretched, heavy and suffocating. He continued, his voice steady, almost conversational. "I've been in love with Adrian for years, long before you came along. I married you because you were convenient. You looked the part, you asked no questions, and you enjoyed the lifestyle. You were perfect for keeping up appearances." Her eyes burned, tears threatening to fall. "You," her voice cracked, "you used me." A faint smirk touched his lips. "Used?" "No, Emily, you knew exactly what you were walking into. You wanted the money, the status, the mansion, and you got it. I gave you more than most men would ever give their wives." Her voice rose, trembling with anger. "You never loved me." "I didn't need to love you," he said simply. "I needed a wife who wouldn't get in my way, and you played your role beautifully. But now, you've seen something you shouldn't have. And if this ever gets out, Emily, if you breathe a word to anyone, I will end you." The words were spoken so calmly that it chilled her more than if he'd shouted. His eyes held hers, and for a moment, she believed him. Malik Khalifa was a man with the means to make good on such a threat without leaving a trace. She swallowed hard, her throat tight. "Why tell me this? Why not lie? Why not—" "Because," he interrupted, "you're not stupid. I'd rather you know the truth than waste my time pretending. Now you can make a choice. Keep your mouth shut and continue enjoying your life, or open it and lose everything." For a moment, the only sound was the distant hum of the air conditioning. Emily's gaze darted past him to Adrian, who was now sitting at the edge of the bed, pulling on his shirt. He didn't look at her. He didn't say a word. The betrayal was layered, her husband's lies, his emotional absence, and now the realization that she had been nothing more than a shield for a love he could never publicly claim. She turned on her heel and walked out, her steps quick, her vision blurred with unshed tears. In her own wing, she closed the door and locked it, pressing her back against the cool wood. Her hands shook violently. She slid down to the floor, burying her face in her knees, as silent sobs racked her body. The memories of Ethan flooded back, his steady voice, his loyalty, the warmth of his love. She had thrown it all away for a man who had never intended to love her, who saw her as a pawn in his carefully crafted image. That night she didn't sleep. She sat by the window watching the city lights flicker in the distance, the weight of Malik's threat echoing in her mind. She knew she couldn't stay like this forever, but leaving wasn't simple. Not with Malik's power, not with the watchful eyes of Lagos high society, and not without risking everything she had. One thing was certain. Something inside her had shifted. The illusion was shattered. She could no longer pretend. And though she didn't yet know how, she would find a way to reclaim herself, even if it meant destroying the life she had once been so desperate to build. The days after that night were heavy with silence. Emily moved through the mansion like a shadow, her once proud posture replaced with a slouch of defeat. Malik didn't change. He carried on as if nothing had happened, traveling with Adrian, returning late at night, and greeting her with the same polite detachment as before. Her appetite faded. The designer meals from the private chef lost their flavor. The spa days, the shopping trips, the glittering charity events, all of it felt meaningless. She was a prisoner in a gilded cage, and the weight of her choices pressed against her chest like a stone. One evening, unable to stand the isolation, Emily picked up her phone and scrolled to a number she hadn't dialed in over a year. Ethan. She hesitated, her thumb hovering over the call button. He had every reason to hate her, but he was the only person who had ever truly cared for her, without condition. She pressed the button. The line rang twice before a deep, confident voice answered. Ethan Cole. For a moment she couldn't speak. The sound of his voice brought a rush of memories. Late-night study sessions, shared dreams, quiet mornings in his cramped apartment. Ethan, it's me. Silence, then his voice cooled. Emily, I wasn't expecting this. I need to see you, she said, her voice trembling. Please, it's important. There was another pause. Fine. Tomorrow. Noon. My office. The next day, she arrived at his headquarters in Victoria Island, the glass skyscraper towering above her, like a monument to everything he had built since she left. His name was etched in gold letters in the marble lobby. Cole International Exports. A receptionist led her to his top-floor office. When the doors opened, she found Ethan standing behind a massive desk, dressed in a tailored navy suit that fit his broader frame perfectly. His hair was sharper, his presence commanding. This was not the same man she had left behind. This was someone who had turned heartbreak into power. He didn't smile. You look different. Emily sat down, clasping her hands in her lap. I made a mistake, Ethan. A huge one. I thought I was choosing the better life, but I was wrong. His eyes narrowed. Wrong? You didn't just choose someone else. You chose a man you barely knew over the one who stood by you for years, and you didn't even have the decency to end things before marrying him. She flinched. I know, and I've been living with that regret every day. Malik, he's not who I thought he was. She hesitated, remembering Malik's threat. Let's just say, he's never loved me. Not once. I'm nothing to him. Ethan leaned back in his chair, studying her. So what? You want me to swoop in and save you? Emily, you made your choice. Now live with it. Tears pricked her eyes. I'm asking for a second chance. Not with us, but with my life. I need help getting away from him. He shook his head. No, you broke me, Emily. And now you're asking me to put myself in danger for you? I've moved on. I have someone who loves me for who I am, not for what I can give her. Her throat tightened. So that's it? That's it, he said firmly. And if you're smart, you'll disappear quietly before Malik decides you've outlived your usefulness. She left his office feeling smaller than she had ever felt before. The walk to her car was a blur. The city outside was alive with honking cars, street vendors, and the distant crash of waves against the marina. But to Emily, everything felt muted. Back at the mansion, the walls seemed to close in tighter. Days turned into weeks, and her hopelessness deepened. Malik ignored her entirely, as though she were an ornament gathering dust. The loneliness was suffocating, but so was the thought of leaving with nothing. One night, as she walked past Malik's study, she noticed his laptop open on the desk, the faint glow of the screen illuminating the room. He was away on yet another business trip with Adrian. Curiosity, or perhaps desperation, pulled her closer. She saw the numbers first: bank account details, transaction records, investments scattered across offshore accounts, and then she saw it. One account holding an astronomical figure in Naira, nearly N3 billion. A plan began to take shape, dangerous and reckless, but it sparked a fire in her chest for the first time in months. Over the next few weeks, she learned everything she could about that account. She watched Malik's habits, noted his passwords, and quietly befriended one of the house staff who helped with his personal correspondence. Piece by piece, she gathered what she needed. Her heart pounded every time she rehearsed the plan in her head. There could be no mistakes. If Malik found out before she was gone, she had no doubt he would follow through on his threat. The night she acted, the mansion was quiet. She sat at Malik's desk, fingers flying over the keyboard, transferring the funds in calculated amounts to accounts she had set up under a false name. Every click felt like a drumbeat in her ears. When it was done, she cleared the browser history, deleted the logs, and shut the laptop with shaking hands. Her bags had been packed days earlier. She left the mansion before dawn, the streets of Lagos still wrapped in darkness. At the airport, she moved quickly, her head down, her sunglasses hiding the fear in her eyes. By the time Malik would wake to discover the theft, she was already on a flight to Johannesburg, the N3 billion safely out of his reach. In South Africa, she checked into a luxury hotel under a false identity. The ocean view was stunning, the air crisp and different from Lagos. But the weight in her chest didn't lift. She had escaped Malik, but she couldn't escape herself. The money sat untouched in her new accounts. She spent her days walking the beaches, her nights staring out at the city lights, replaying every decision that had led her here. Ethan's rejection echoed in her mind. Malik's cold confession haunted her. The truth was unavoidable. She had chased gold and ended up drowning in it. Her life was now a prison without walls, and regret was the only companion she had left. The sun was setting over Johannesburg, the city bathed in shades of amber and deep violet. Emily stood on the balcony of her rented villa, looking out at the city skyline. The warm breeze carried the faint scent of jacaranda blossoms, but it brought her no comfort. She had been in South Africa for 3 months now, and every day felt like a strange mixture of freedom and imprisonment. The N3 billion she had taken from Malik sat untouched in multiple offshore accounts, hidden under names that weren't hers. She could spend it, yes, but she rarely did. Money, she'd learned, had a different weight when it was stolen. Every time she opened her laptop to check her balances, the numbers glared back at her like silent accusations. She had risked everything for this wealth, yet it didn't make her feel rich. It made her feel hunted. At first, she expected Malik to come after her. She braced for it. She imagined private investigators tracking her, unexpected knocks at her door, strange faces watching her from across the street. But the days passed and nothing happened. No one came. No message, no threat, no attempt to recover the stolen fortune. It was as if Malik had erased her from his life the moment she left. That truth cut deeper than any revenge could have. She had imagined herself as someone worth chasing, worth fighting for. Instead, she was just another discarded piece in his carefully controlled life. The money she took? A minor inconvenience to a man with wealth stretching across continents. Back in Lagos, Malik's life moved forward without a hitch. His business empire continued to expand, his name appearing in headlines tied to new deals, new acquisitions, new charity initiatives. When asked privately about Emily's disappearance, he would smirk and say, Good riddance. The words carried no bitterness, just indifference. It was as if she had been a temporary accessory, one he'd simply decided not to wear anymore. For Emily, the absence of pursuit was a strange kind of punishment. She had the money, yes, but she had no meaning. She drifted through her days, morning swims in the infinity pool, long walks on the beach, solitary dinners at expensive restaurants where no one knew her name. The silence of her phone was constant. The only calls she received were from her accountant and the occasional hotel concierge. No friends, no family, no Ethan. Ethan. His name still had the power to hollow her out. She thought about calling him again after fleeing Lagos, but she knew what he would say, or rather, what he wouldn't. Their last meeting had left a scar she couldn't touch without reopening. She had gone to him seeking comfort, but he had given her only the truth. She had destroyed what they had, and he had no interest in piecing it back together. In Lagos, Ethan's story had taken a different path. Coal International Exports, his company, had become one of the most successful import-export businesses in the country. He'd turned his heartbreak into ambition, his ambition into power. And somewhere along the way, he'd found love again. Her name was Lauren, a woman who didn't come from the same glittering circles Emily had chased. She was grounded, kind, and saw Ethan not as a prize, but as a partner. Their relationship was private, but strong, built on quiet loyalty rather than public spectacle. When they married, it wasn't on the society pages. It was in a small coastal ceremony attended by close friends and family. The photographs, which Emily eventually saw online, showed Ethan smiling in a way she hadn't seen in years. Genuine, unguarded, whole. The contrast was cruel. Ethan had built something real. Malik had carried on as if she'd never existed. And Emily had only her regret. Some nights, lying awake in her rented bed, she thought back to the moment Ethan handed her that job listing for Khalifa Manufacturing Group. That single, selfless act had been meant to change her life for the better. And it had, just not in the way either of them imagined. If she had chosen differently, if she had valued love over luxury, she might still be with him. They might have built a life together. But the truth was clear. She had chosen the gold, and the gold had cost her everything. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd once believed that having more would make her happy, that the mansion, the clothes, the travel, the power of being Mrs. Malik Khalifa would be the pinnacle of success. But standing on her balcony now, in a foreign city with more money than she could ever spend, she had never felt poor. One afternoon, she went for a walk along the beach. The sand was warm beneath her feet, the ocean stretching endlessly before her. She watched couples walking hand in hand, children chasing waves, families laughing under umbrellas. She felt invisible among them, a ghost carrying secrets no one could see. She wondered if she'd ever be able to go back to Lagos. Part of her longed for it, the chaos of the streets, the vibrant hum of the markets, even the sharp smell of rain on the hot pavement. But going back meant facing Malik's world again, and she knew she couldn't. Not with what she'd done, not with what she'd become. Still, the thought lingered. Maybe one day, when enough time had passed, when Malik no longer thought of her at all, she could return quietly. But she knew that day, if it ever came, was far off. For now, she would remain here, living in the shadows of her choices, surrounded by the wealth she once craved, haunted by the love she had thrown away. The N3 billion would keep her comfortable for life, but it could never buy back the parts of herself she had lost. And in the quiet moments, those long stretches between sunrise and sunset, she wondered which was worse, being chased down and punished for her theft, or being forgotten entirely. What did you take away from this story? Was Emily a victim of bad luck, or did she create her own downfall through her choices? Do you think Malik was the true villain here, or was he just honest about who he was from the start? Could Ethan have forgiven her, or was walking away the best decision he ever made? Share your thoughts in the comments. I want to know what lesson you learned from this.